Psychosis, a severe mental condition in which thought and emotions are so affected that contact is lost with external reality. Now, in a chauvinistic culture where the focus is on the individual, psychosis is viewed as the individual losing touch with an objective reality. However, there isn't an objective reality, right? And a relationship is mutual, meaning an individual can no more lose touch with reality than reality can lose touch with an individual. In other words, you can't have one without the other. Psychosis, then, is a severe reality that is so traumatic for the egos that are in that reality, that a certain percentage of egos or individuals are dissociated through shock and trauma from reality, right? And at a certain point, for example, reality is defined by the majority as what the majority narrative is. You know, we have a narrative that says that once upon a time, there was nothing. And then, poof, something the size of a pea or smaller bursts into existence for no particular reason, and the entire universe unfolds rationally and logically and predictably after that point. That's our little story. And because most of us agree with most of that story, that is reality. And so somebody who believes a different story, once upon a time there was a snake, the snake bit its tail, and poof, all of reality came into being. Well, they've lost touch with reality, right? Meaning their story is different. Now, in schizophrenia, you have two patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, two identities that don't talk together, and they're inside one individual. In schizophrenia, you have two groups of people that are completely different and don't talk to one another, and you have a schizophrenic culture, right? So one can measure the health of a culture. One can measure the degree of shock, the degree of trauma, and the empathy and the competency with which traumatized people are healed of that trauma and integrated back into the culture. So you can measure how psychotic culture is by how many of its members are in a psychotic state to one degree or another. And you can measure how psychotic an individual is by how coherent their relationship with the majority is, whether it's the majority ecology, natural ecology, or whether it's the majority in the cult or culture. And you can also measure the psychosis of a culture by how divergent its narrative is from the ecological narrative. Meaning, if you have a cult or culture that's based on consumption and expansion and destruction of the underlying ecology upon which all individuals depend, then you could say it's a psychotic culture because it's not in touch with the laws of physics. The laws of physics say that if you cut down all the trees, you die of a lack of oxygen. But if the law of the culture says that we're making progress the more trees we cut down, then there's a divergence, there's a psychosis between the majority, like 99.9% of the universe, is in touch with the laws of physics. But if your cult, if you belong to a cult that diverges from the law of physics and instill a doctrine in your cult members that has nothing to do with the laws of physics, that you're literally sawing away at the tree that you've climbed, below where you're sitting in the tree, you've got a psychotic culture. But the thing to generally understand is you do not have a psychotic individual without a psychotic family. And you don't have a psychotic family without a psychotic culture, and you don't have a psychotic culture without a psychotic species. And in a fractal analysis, you can generally say that within each individual, there is perhaps 10% psychosis. And within a population, perhaps 10% of the people, some with dementia, some with severe trauma, some with delusion, some with schizophrenia, have broken. They've lost touch with some part of themselves, right? And you can say that within the species, right, 10% of the cultures have lost touch with the narrative of the larger species. So it's not an individual thing, and to the extent that it is also a collective pattern. And if you cannot, if the culture is so dissociative from empathy, humanity, from love, from sustainability, from the ability to meet our human needs to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, to have self-esteem. If the culture is so psychotic that coming back in touch with it is traumatic, painful, confusing, and mildly insane, then some individuals will not want to increase the amount of pain and insanity they are in and will prefer to dissociate from a psychotic cult. In which case, it is a question of whether any member or group of the cult is able and willing to heal the psychosis by meeting a representative that is acknowledging that state in the culture in a healthier and more loving way. Right? You see a mild psychosis every time a lover says, "Do you want to see me tonight?" And you say no, and it's too painful for them to deal with that reality. And so they create a narrative. They create a narrative that says, oh, they really do want to see me, or no means yes, or if I push, or if only they could see what I see in my picture, then they would want to see me again, right? So rejected love, rejected attraction is so is so painful that we see psychosis in that area. If you see a friend that owes you some money and they don't want to pay it back, you say, when are you going to pay my loan back? And they change the subject. In other words, they don't want to deal with a reality that's painful or uncomfortable or brings up feelings of helplessness, so they shift to another reality, right? Now, as long as people have other realities to shift to, right? They see you walking along the street, they owe you some money, so they can go down to another street and avoid you and not go insane. But if every single street they go down, there's someone who wants them to pay a loan back. If going home, there's someone that's going to shout at them, right? In other words, if there's no way to go to avoid that helpless feeling, then dissociating from a cult, from a culture that would co-create such a phenomena is the most intelligent or the most probable outcome. So to the extent that a cult or a culture can co-create a reality with its members that most of its members want to experience, is to the degree that there will be a low level of psychosis. And to the extent that a cult manufactures so many traumatic events on so many dimensions, in so many regions, going to work is a traumatic experience, coming home is a traumatic experience, going dating is a traumatic experience, going to the bank is a traumatic experience. If there's no place to rest, right, then more and more of its members will dissociate, will disown, will dishonor a highly traumatic reality.